This is EdUp, Accelerated Excellence.
Leaders, entrepreneurs, and change agents looking for the opportunity to network and exchange ideas with other trailblazers and to further your brand. The 2.0 conference is for you. Experts from the fields of education, health, internet, marketing, and CXO are welcome to take part in the 2025 conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, March 4th through 6th. Reserve your space today and receive a 10% discount courtesy of EdUp Accelerated Excellence with the code EDUP10OFF. That's EDUP10OFF. Learn more and register online at www.the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUP10OFF.
So welcome back to EdUp Accelerated Excellence, a podcast for the advancement of educational effectiveness and equity. We have another outstanding guest, Chezare A. Warren, PhD. He is an accomplished author, artist, and intellectual. He is an associate professor of education policy with a secondary faculty appointment in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Vanderbilt University's esteemed Peabody College. Dr. Warren is also an affiliated faculty in African American and Diaspora Studies and principal investigator for the Possibilities Project, which we'll talk a bit about on this episode, an arts-informed knowledge hub committed to advancing evidence-based Black education solutions. He is a scholar of race and intersectional justice and former, wait for it, math teacher. Mm-hmm. So as you can tell, education is in his blood, and he works at all levels of learners. He is an award-winning scholar, and he is a member of Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Brother Warren, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Are you an Alpha?
I am not an Alpha.
Oh, okay.
I would tell you a story, but we'll do that offline.
Got you. Okay. I appreciate the very warm invitation.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. Hey, listen, I appreciate it. Now we're just gabbing before we get into the meat of our point of being here today. But we met here in New York, and I've been admiring your work from afar. So let's do this. Let's lay the foundation for our conversation. What is empathy?
What is empathy? I mean, at a basic level, empathy is one's ability to adopt the psychological point of view of someone else and then to respond in a way that produces a favorable outcome for them. In a nutshell.
I like that. Very straightforward. So in 2024, earlier this year, you had a TED Talk, or you participated in a TED Talk. Mm-hmm. You addressed the concept of false empathy, which is, I believe, an important concept in your work and the work of others who are focusing on anti-racism or anti-discriminatory curricula and educational systems. Mm-hmm. So just remind us, for anybody who did not, remind us for anybody who did not see your TED Talk, what is false empathy and the role it plays in your research?
Yeah, so well, first of all, go watch the TED Talk. I think you'll enjoy it, and it's very short. It's 9 minutes. It's a fun, brief conversation on the concept of empathy and true support. The role that false empathy plays in my research actually is, I would describe it as like foundational. I entered into the professoriate and academic life with a focus on teacher empathy, particularly for its utility to improve how initially white women teachers learn to communicate and respond across racial and cultural difference with Black boys. I entered that conversation as a classroom teacher, teaching middle school math alongside a lot of well-meaning white women who had a really difficult time building relationships with Black boys. And it wasn't about their training, it wasn't about their intellect or their willpower or their willingness to show up and be present and to work hard, but it was something in the ways that they were communicating and responding and engaging and relating to these boys that was short-circuiting their effectiveness or their ability to produce the sort of outcomes that we would assign to an effective teacher.
Mhm.
And so I read this piece, and I talk a bit about it in the TED Talk. So I'm going to push you to go hear more about it there. But I read this piece that sort of got me thinking about, could false empathy or the lack of empathy explain why my colleagues, again, who I would describe as well-meaning, were having such a difficult time building relationships with Black boys? Because it was unsettling to me that as a Black male teacher, that I was also the person who they sent all the Black boys to, not even necessarily for discipline. Sometimes there was a whole disciplinary apparatus, in the school, but it was more like, you got really good relationships with Black kids, and it's got to be more than, I was thinking this, it's got to be more than I'm Black is the reason why Black kids trust me. What about my practice, and what can we learn about this concept of empathy that can move the practice of teaching forward, in particular, what we know about culturally responsive pedagogy as a sort of theory. If I can translate that theory to practice, is empathy something that can bolster how we do culturally responsive pedagogy? And when I looked at the literature, there was such little empirical research on empathy. That is what sort of started me on the journey. So false empathy is an entry point through which to have a more robust conversation. Well, what is empathy, and what place does it have in a multicultural classroom setting?
So essentially, you're pioneering an area that can help facilitate the work that many folks are working on around culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy and
Yeah.
or DEI, but advancing the academic, and I would probably guess also sort of the affective um, outcomes for students, particularly in this case, you mentioned Black males. So, and that started while you were teaching in P-12 schools. So can you,
Yes, because I did not have the privilege of going to school full time as a doctoral student. So I was going to class at night and teaching all day. So I was, I tell my students, in some ways, I don't have a lot of sympathy for them because I was a full-time working person and a full-time student. Uh, Drawbacks and benefits to that approach, but it was really transformative because I immediately started my career, my socialization into academic life from the perspective that what we do as scholars in the ivory tower needs to have an implication on practice, and because I had to think about practice every day.
yeah, that's really wonderful. Almost in the sense sort of action research.
I mean, in some ways, but yeah. Hmm.
Let's use it as a jumping off point. So walk us through your career journey in education and how that road led you to this to your current work. And then if you could talk about empathy, that'd be great too.
Yes, so I, I'm creeping up on 20 years this fall, and it's kind of crazy to sort of think about all the twists and turns and how I never could predict where I would be today versus when I was starting out. I just knew I wanted to be a teacher and I want to teach Black kids. That's really all I knew. And that has been a sort of anchor for me, that even as I moved out of the K-12 classroom and I became an administrator, moving into the professoriate, my research commitment and my outreach and service work has always been to continue to innovate and understand the conditions that facilitate Black kids' well-being. That's the thread over time, is that as a practitioner and then as a researcher, my work has always been anchored to how can Black kids come to school and be in school and be thriving? And what do adults need to do to build the sort of environments that enable that thriving? And I tend to think about that and locate that thriving from the place of the interpersonal, the one-on-one and group interactions that an adult has with a young person. You can be in a dilapidated building, and there's something about the connection that an adult has with a young person that can make the learning that happens in that building be absolutely transformative and extraordinary. And I think about that too with Black teachers pre-Brown, who the material conditions of education clearly did not match that of their white counterparts, but there was a pride and a cultural, a sense of self and commitment to whole child well-being that sustained and protected Black kids and contributed to their academic success. And those things were in conversation. That's always been the sort of mission. I think as a scholar, you start with a set of questions, and if you are really committed to the life of the mind, you do your work, and then you get a whole new set of questions, and you continue to evolve those questions relative to what is going on in the world around you. So I'll say sort of briefly, I wrote a dissertation on white women teachers with Black boys and evidence of empathy. Um, I wrote a series of articles. Obviously, you keep reading, you keep paying attention to what's happening in your fields. And then, Michael Dumas gets credited quite a bit for introducing theoretical perspectives on anti-Blackness. And the more I started to study and make sense of the subject of Blackness,
Right.
as its own sort of standalone concept, because we can put Black on any sort of, Black psychology, Black whatever,
Right.
and not have a clear sense around what we even mean when we use the language of the Black and what pictures are conjured and how that informs our research design and so on. So even as I was studying empathy and making arguments for its utility and also its risks, I was also developing more and more interest in and expertise relative to trying to understand the Black in Black education and its relationship to these sort of same questions around well-being and how we humanize education experience for Black kids. And so I'm more situated in the space in Black education where I'm writing a little less about empathy, and I've been doing a lot of thinking more broadly around concepts like possibility, its relationship to mourning, how we rethink mourning as not wholly bad, but what does it teach us about the concept of Blackness and what Blackness can afford relative to producing possibility? It's pushed me to just really be more expansive in my view of the work and what the work needs to be. So yeah, and that's kind of where I am right now. The Possibilities Project is a subject of a sabbatical I had that allowed me to spend some time in New York City. And if you've ever spent time in Harlem in particular, it's like, folks will describe it as the Black Mecca.
Right.
I really came to understand Black life just it was just such a beautiful and profound appreciation for our culture, our language, our artistic contributions, our intellectual contributions. And I read a book called Freedom Dreams by Robin D.G. Kelley. And you may ask me a bit about Centering Possibility. But that book, Centering Possibility, is a subject of me reading Freedom Dreams and thinking a lot about the Black radical imagination. Because at the same time, I was also listening to reading histories of the Black Power movement and
Mhm.
just learning more about the difference between arguing for Black citizenship versus arguing for Black dignity and humanity. It was two
Right.
separate things.
Right.
So yeah, that's a longer story, but that's kind of how I got here.
When you were talking, I had, my neurons were on fire. But you talked about this notion of asking questions, but asking questions from your observations of in the world, not
Hmm.
of the world, but in the world. But
Hmm.
this idea, it reminded me of something I heard just this week. Education is a contact sport. It is
Hmm.
up close. It requires relationships. Um,
Hmm.
and how we think about it, whether you're talking about a classroom or in informal spaces, when we learn from others. So even a book, it creates a relationship with the author in a way, and the content and the subject matter in a way that expands you. So I really like that, and I'm holding on to this idea as you were talking about the relationships that happen through through education. So let's talk about the possibilities project or the possibility project. So can you describe the project um, and we will get into the questions about what it poses, but I believe, and I saw this somewhere in one of your, either on your website somewhere, but you said it leads with this idea of what does it mean for Black children's possibility rather than problems to anchor efforts aimed at transforming their education experience. So is that the true question? And if so,
Yeah.
I hope I didn't muddle that up, but what are you finding from that question so far?
Yeah, so I think to talk about the Possibilities Project, I should just say a little bit about in my last book, Centering Possibility in Black Education, which, as I just intimated, was inspired by time I spent in New York City, reading in Harlem, reading Freedom Dreams, and then just other works in Black studies, and part of what sort of moved me in the direction of thinking about the concept of possibility before I actually started writing the book. The discourse around schools as sites of Black pain and suffering is really loud. Like as folks in our field started to access, Saidiya Hartman and Fred Moten and Frank Wilderson and these folks who talk about, and even going back as to the '80s, Orlando Patterson and talking about social death, and Christina Sharp book came out in 2016, and we started to make all of these connections to
Right.
Black life in the present day relative to chattel slavery, what it means for social constructions of Blackness, and then how that then translates to education policy and practice, right down to the structural conditions of teaching and learning in the American education project.
Right.
A lot of that conversation boils down to schools in America are harmful places for Black kids, and we have numerous data points across multiple indicators of school success and failure that would suggest that Black kids are underserved. Not that they are struggling, but that they are underserved, which is exacerbating their suffering. Those discourses are important. So I never want to discount their significance to the conversation. What I was finding, however, was that I was going in schools and people needed answers to serve Black kids. So
Mhm.
theory helps us to understand social phenomena in a way that should inform how we do our work. So we can't discount or peripheralize the significance of theory, but theory has its limits to responding in real time to the pragmatic dilemmas faced by teachers and educators who are teaching Black kids.
Right.
So it's important to me as an education scholar, because I think we have a burden in this field to be thinking about how we translate theory and how we move praxis forward. And so for me, as I was sitting with the concept of freedom dreams, and he talks a lot about in this book, the difference between what you're fighting for versus what you're fighting against, and how activists and orators and artists in the Black radical tradition tended to be driven by what they were fighting for. They had visions of Black life that was driving the justice work that we know them for. And I started to ask myself the question, well, what about Black life did they see? And could possibility be one of the things that they saw? You look at a Black child and you see their future. You see what they can be. You don't just see all of the conditions that enclose them, that render them vulnerable. And so, again, you turn to the research. I'm like, there's not a lot of work that has theorized and sat with the concept of possibility specifically. And that led me to write the book, Centering Possibility. I published an article called From Mourning to Morning, Reflections on our mourning as a pathway to possibility in Black education. And the point here is to think about the relationship of Blackness to the concept of possibility. And so the Possibilities Project is the research lab. I call it a research practice policy collaborative because it's a space that is both generating research in Black education, but also it's a space to convene folks who are doing the work, whether you're in a nonprofit, you're an activist, an organizer, you're working in a school, you're just a concerned community member. We need collective impact spaces to be able to talk across our silos and to be transdisciplinary. So it's a convening space, and then it's also a space to amplify, from an academic standpoint, the work of other scholars who are innovating in this area, particularly with respect to not just rehearsing the ways that suffering plays itself out. Again, not discounting that work. The mission of the Possibilities Project is to then take that as a starting point and to document, well, what does transformation look like in real time? What can we learn about the tensions associated with transformation? And does that open up new pathways or portals of understanding that could be really useful for moving the ball on Black education? And so that's kind of what the Possibilities Project is. We doing our best work in Nashville, to be in community with folks outside of Vanderbilt, but also to build community with Black scholars, graduate students, faculty in Vanderbilt to continue to advance these conversations.
Again, impact sport, high impact.
Mhm.
It requires this. I like this collectiveness. Um, but you talked earlier about starting your work and the questions that were raised, and you talked
Mhm.
about possibilities. For me, it depends on what lens you're looking at when you go into a classroom and you see Black children. Can you see possibilities? Because not everybody can see
Mhm.
possibilities. So
Right.
that's a very good point. So, kudos to this work. So the book, Centering Possibility for Black Educators, was published in 2021 by Teachers College Press. So and that was during COVID when it was published, and it was also during this I guess another pandemic where many Black and Brown community members were dying at the hands of police.
Mhm.
But this book is interesting because it centers the work of, speaking of centering, centers the work of artists as educators. So why that approach? Why the artist perspective?
One of the things, a really good question. One of the things that I come to realize in sort of reading these histories of Black Power, the Black histories of social movements in the Black Power sort of period. Art has always been landscape to any major social movement, in part because art provides us vision and a language for a world and a future we have yet to apprehend or words to articulate, so it's in a dance move. It's in a brushstroke. It's in a way a story is told. It's the way the chord structure in a song is or I mean, it just moves our spirits in a way. And I just thought, how do I write about possibility and not also have that possibility reflected in multiple formats, right? So you're gonna get music lyrics in the book, you're gonna get paintings and photographs. And I just thought this would be a beautiful layer to speaking to the point that you just made around collectivity.
Right.
I think we have a burden also as scholars to break down the walls for bringing and being in conversation with folks who are not in academia. There's always a tension around how we're being made legible to the academic marketplace when we do that because we have to reorient our priorities around, how we write and where we spend our time. But I think it's so important to keep us sober to what the mission and what the work ought to be. And so I just had to have artists. And also, as an artist, as somebody who is continuing to lean into the parts of myself that academia sought to sanitize and flatten, it was important to me that I also, the Possibilities Project is also a space for me to do art and for it to be a coherent part of my academic profile. It's not separate and off in a corner. It's a part of who I am. It's another lane through which to disseminate knowledge and understanding. And so, yeah, I just needed the art to be present because there was no way I think the credibility of a book like that required that it had multiple representations of the concept.
So I have another question about that, but I'm going to make an insert here. So what I'm hearing is being able to infuse your own artistic knowledge and sensibilities is bringing one's whole self and embodied self to a project. And
100%.
so, because you centered artists in that work, uh, what was the lesson you learned from that approach, the process or the product?
That's a good question. A lesson I learned. Well, I feel like when you're working with other people, you always learn patience. I don't have a lot of patience for adults sometimes. So you learn patience. But um, I think the longer I've been in this career or just alive, you learn to be open, speaking of, to the possibilities for how a project can turn out and not to be so myopic and like it has to look like this and it has to be this way. I approached this with an idea, made a Facebook post, and was overwhelmed by the response and, had to turn away folks who wanted to be represented in this book, right? And folks whose work has never been published anywhere, they got to be published in a book on a reputable press, academic press. So just being open and not having to control everything, I think the pandemic taught me that more than anything. But this project and just my academic work, like I have a plan for how much I want to get done. And then when it doesn't get done, I've just learned to be okay. Like
Right.
it'll get done in the time that it's supposed to get done.
Right. I think,
What
yeah,
this needs to be is what it's going to be right now, and I need to be okay with what it is right now. And then the next thing will be the next thing.
yeah, I feel you on that one.
Experts from the fields of education, health, internet, marketing, and CXO are welcome to take part in the 2025 2.0 conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, March 4th through 6. Reserve your space today and receive a 10% discount courtesy of EdUp Accelerated Excellence with the code EDUP10OFF. That's EDUP10 off. Learn more and register online at www.the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUP10OFF.
Are you an educational leader or organization seeking innovation or just a new perspective? Then look no further. Accelerated Excellence Consulting is dedicated to offering support to educational leaders and their organizations to meet their full potential for excellence. Services include strategic planning and problem solving, continuous improvement expertise in areas such as assessment and accreditation, and professional development, empowering leaders, individuals, and groups for personal growth for organizational excellence. To learn more, find us online at xeconsulting.org. That's xeconsulting.org. You have a byline that says author, intellectual, and musician. So I'm just going to put it out there. I think you're a true Renaissance man. So can you tell us a bit about how your art, in particular, can be a form of advocacy?
Yeah, there are people and places that art will go that my journal articles will not, or that my books will not. And I do not see my art as fractured from or isolated from who I am as a scholar. It's a venue or a vehicle to represent my scholarship in alternate formats, to alternate, like not alternate audiences, but audiences that are not an academic audience per se.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, the music, I hope, well, not I hope, because it doesn't really matter, but my love for Black people runs deep.
Right.
I was about to say, I hope you can sense my love for Black people, but even if you don't, it doesn't really matter if you can sense it or not. What's important to know is that I'm motivated by and moved by how it is that we demonstrate to Black folks in particular, all folks, but considering the pronounced specific assaults on Black life, I'm very interested in, intentional about naming how it is that we love Black people out loud in multiple forms, and how my work can then facilitate that love and that care and illuminate the deep brilliance that resides in our community. part of why this is so important to me is because in 2016, when that man got elected president of these United States, considering all I know about racism and white supremacy, I still found myself in a deep sense of grief and mourning over like, how have we come so far and not have gone that far at all that we can elect somebody so outwardly and explicitly egregious in their politic and their orientation to other human beings, black, white, and otherwise, and this person can still get millions of votes, right? And the only way that I was able to sustain myself and my intellect, my mental well-being in that moment was to turn into Black life. So for me, Black life has been a space of refuge, and I have wanted to protect. And anything, I think about this like during the pandemic, I moved back to Chicago and bought a condo, and I had sat down and I remember exhaling and feeling like, oh my God, I'm home. Like it had been 10 years. I've been looking for home. I searched all over and couldn't find home. And when you find yourself at home, you want to protect it. You want to show it off. You want to decorate it and make sure everybody knows how great it is and make sure you know how great it is. I sort of see my artists like doing that and with respect to Black life. And because I'm an artist that is also deeply influenced by gospel music, I have been in church my whole entire life. My expression is also shaded or tinted by my faith, the faith community and beliefs and gospel. So that is also representative and related to the art. And so the music is, yeah, it's my way, it's my love letter, it's a way of communicating and being responsive to Black life.
So what's next for Chezare Warren, and how might the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community engage with your work?
I will go look at the TED Talk, okay?
What is the title of your TED Talk?
The difference between false empathy and true support.
There you go.
The title. Had to
So
look that thing up.
what's on the horizon?
So I am working on finally putting some music out. So I think following me on the social medias, Chezare Augustus on Instagram and Twitter, but also if you go to my website, ChezareWarren.com, right at the bottom, you can join an email list, a database of supporters. I do not message people very often, but it's a way to have a direct connect and to know what things are happening. I'm hoping to do a couple shows in the fall into the spring leading up to a release. Working on a new book about empathy, tentatively titled Empathy in Black, Race and the Spectacle of Human Connection. So that's on the horizon. In the distant future, 26 will probably be a release on that. But generally around giving talks in different places around the country in the fall. So yeah, just follow me on the social media. That's probably the best way.
So when you do the showcase, what cities?
I'm still deciding. So markets.
I know Chicago is your hometown, so I know you.
Yeah, I was gonna say
That
markets.
goes without saying.
Where I have significant social networks. So markets, Philadelphia, Nashville are places that New York are places that will likely be first in the list. I'm working with my team to sort of start to help me to just really plan. I'm an academic first and a creative. And so I got to get people on board that's helping me figure this thing out. I'm also finishing an MBA. That's the other thing. I graduated in December with an MBA from Northwestern. So
Wonderful.
that's had me sewed up. But that's yeah. So yes, I'm very busy. That's the problem. I'm trying to de-intensify my life a little bit.
Chezare Warren, PhD, MBA.
Yes, as of December 14th.
Hey, kudos on that one. So listen, I've been edified. I'm sure the community members for EdUp Accelerated Excellence have been as well. I want to thank you for this opportunity to learn with you and from you.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you for engaging with the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community. You can find this episode and others on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Music. And if you like this episode, please don't forget to follow us and share within your network.